Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 69th ever Highlight Haven interview. My name is Matthew Heiserman, and today we are joined by Carolina Panthers reporter for the Charlotte Observer, Mike Kaye. Mike, it's great to have you on.
Matthew, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate you coming on and getting right into it. You graduated from the University of North Florida in 2011, and throughout your career, you've previously covered the entire NFL for Pro Football Network, the Philadelphia Eagles for NJ Advanced Media, and the Jacksonville Jaguars for First Cross News. I just want to start by asking when you first knew you wanted to work in the sports industry, and how do you describe the journey you've taken to get to where you are today?
It's an interesting path. So I originally wanted to be a screenwriter, and I wanted to go to film school. And while I was in college, the recession happened, got me thinking about other careers. I was in broadcasting. I ran the broadcasting department at UNF, and I kind of fell in love with news and reporting
Mhm.
and telling stories that way. And so I started off in news. I was in West Palm Beach originally, and then I decided to work with my parents in public relations to kind of hone my writing skills. And while I
Mhm.
was doing that, I was doing side work for SB Nation and
Yeah.
covering the NFL draft. So that all kind of took off. And then the guy who originally hired me in West Palm Beach got hired in Jacksonville and said, this was an untapped opportunity to come cover the Jaguars. And I jumped at
Mhm.
the opportunity. And it was an opportunity to be closer to my parents, closer to my wife's parents. And it's 11 seasons later. And
Mhm.
so
Yeah.
it's been a fun adventure. This job is not for the faint at heart. You're going to miss birthdays. You're going to miss anniversaries. You're going to miss holidays. But if you're having fun doing this job, the highs of this job are great.
Yeah, absolutely. And getting into some Panthers discussion, they selected Arizona wide receiver Ted McMillan with the eighth overall pick in the 2025 NFL Draft. While McMillan did not run the 40-yard dash at the NFL Combine, his 40 time at the Pro Day was reportedly 4.48 seconds. Does it concern you that he doesn't necessarily bring that game-changing speed to the table, which is something that this Carolina wide receiver core could definitely benefit from?
Yeah, and honestly, I think while that was a reported time, I think the time was actually slower. And just watching film and seeing some other reports, I agree. I thought that they could use more speed over size, but I do think McMillan helps them in a vertical offense. I think his ability to catch basically everything when you have a smaller quarterback.
Mhm.
A lot of the times when you're throwing the ball deep, people don't know this, but the quarterback can't always see the wide receiver in the matchup, as the ball's going. And I think Tet kind of, or T-Mac as he likes to be called, kind of alleviates some of those issues. I think they struggled with drops last year, especially from Xavier Legette, and I think McMillan, who has very sure hands, can really help in that regard.
Now, in Dane Brugler's annual NFL draft guide, he said McMillan shines at the catch point and uses his Gumby like body adjustment skills to frame the football with his hands, regardless of the placement or action required. That said, how do you sort of see the Panthers utilizing McMillan as a rookie this season? He's going to fit alongside Xavier Legette and Adam Thielen in the wide receiver core. And then this is the second first round pick that Carolina has spent on a wide receiver in the past 2 years. They selected Xavier Legette last year at 32nd overall pick, and last season, underwhelming rookie campaign, 49 receptions, 497 receiving yards, and 4 receiving touchdowns. What's that distribution going to look like? Are we going to see less from Legette? What are we going to see from McMillan? Obviously, Thielen's aging, all that.
Yeah, I think you're going to see Thielen take a little bit of a backseat, but I
Mhm.
think in a good way. I think you'll see it, with a quarterback situation that's entrenched now, they can distribute the ball accordingly. I think you'll see Canales' offense evolve a little bit. Last year, they were ranked 29th overall. I think the running game is going to open up stuff for the passing game. I think you can look at McMillan as the true X receiver. He's going to take on press coverage, hopefully beat it. give you some big plays down the field, more jump balls than, yards after catch. But
Mhm.
he does have some understated smoothness to his game. I agree with Brugler's point about him being a Gumby-like body. And then I think you'll see Xavier Legette is more of the gadget underneath guy. I think he'll be the flanker. You'll see him kind of do end arounds. You'll see him run slant and goes. You'll see him kind of use in all different ways. And I think, Legette is better off being a number 2 wide receiver. And I think McMillan being in house allows him to be
Mhm.
that guy.
Yeah, 100%. And the Panthers selected Texas A&M linebacker Nick Scorcher with the 59th pick in the draft. And going into today, I was going to ask what that might look like with Jadeveon Clowney, but obviously that's not the question anymore. After Clowney was released by the Panthers earlier today, what can we expect to see from Scorton in 2025 in terms of his play style and obviously the fact that he has now earned that starting role? Or I don't know if I would necessarily say earned, but he has gotten that starting role.
Well, that's the thing. I don't know that he will start. I think you'll see DJ Wanham and Patrick Jones kind of get the bulk of the snaps early on.
Mhm,
Ejiro Evero, the defensive coordinator, typically has not rushed to play rookies. But I
mhm,
do think Scorton will have a role. I think comparable to Clowney, he is a pretty good edge setter and a good run
mhm.
stopper. I think they're going to develop his pass rushing. Remember, he just went through like a huge body transformation. So
Yeah.
he's only 20 years old. He's got to learn his body, and his upside's tremendous, but he
Mhm.
has to learn how to play with more speed, more burst. I mean, when you watch him on tape, he is an absolute disruptor, but I think losing 28 pounds and being 257 as opposed to 280 on the edge will help him tremendously. I think, Princely Uman Milan, the 3rd round pick, he's actually probably better off getting an early role as a 3rd down pass rusher. He wins with speed. You want to talk about Gumby body, that man can stretch
Mhm.
and bend. And so I think they feel good about their first 4 guys. But they need a 5th guy to emerge. That's probably going to be a battle between former draft picks, Amari Barno and DJ Johnson.
Now, in the third round, the Panthers selected Ole Miss linebacker Princely Uman Milan, who you just talked about. Uh, when you compared the two, Scorton relied more on a bull rush with a spin and I guess a high motor to beat
Mm-hmm.
blockers. Uman Milan tries to beat offensive linemen with his bend and his speed. What do you see his role looking like? What could that starting position potentially be if he does end up getting that role in 2025?
Yeah, I think long term that they'd like for those guys to be the bookends. Wanham's in the final year of his deal. Patrick Jones, the guy who's going to move around. If you're familiar how the Eagles have used their pass rushers over the last few years, even dating back to when Jim Schwartz was in Philly, Brandon Graham is probably the prototype for Nick Scorton, and then Josh Sweat is probably the prototype for Uman Milan. So like they complement each other extremely well. Scorton's a big-bodied, bulky
Yeah.
guy who is going to set the edge, take guys down, win, like you said, with a bull rush. His
Mhm.
spin move is nasty. If you
Yeah,
watch this guy, I
100%.
mean, I wouldn't want to be hit by that elbow,
Mhm.
even with a helmet on. And I think Uman Milan wins with speed. He's going to
Mhm.
get range around the corner. He does have a little bit of understated power, and I think he can use speed to power, but I think for the most part, they're going to want him to just get around guys. And that'll help with the bull rush from the other side.
Yeah.
You'll have kind of like a sort of, you know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
it'll
Yeah.
be kind of
Mhm.
like a symphony of scariness from a pressure standpoint. And then I think when you look at the way that they kind of operate, I think there will be times where they use an even front, and then you can get 3 edge rushers potentially in one where Patrick Jones goes inside with Derek Brown, and then you have these 2 young speed pass rushing wizards on the outside. I think ideally that's how they'd like to go.
Yeah, now as I mentioned earlier, Jadeveon Clowney was released today, and I don't know if that necessarily makes the biggest impact from a skill set perspective because you were definitely seeing that decline in his progression or in his production after he was aging. He's 32 years old right now. But do you think that maybe hurts more when you consider that they no longer have that veteran leadership that he brought to the table?
Well, I think there's always this assumption that great players are automatically great leaders. I think you see,
Mhm,
like with Bryce Harper in baseball, that he has had to grow into being a leader, even though he
mhm.
is a great player.
Yeah.
I actually thought DJ Wanham was more of the leader of the group
Hmm.
in a lot of ways, had a lot of empathy for players, really thoughtful. Clowney helped by example, but I think when you look at the way that they have looked at the outside linebacker position, they swapped out the outside linebacker coach, brought in AC Carter from the Rams.
Hmm.
They have drafted two guys, like as you've mentioned on day two. They bring in Patrick Jones. Like they're clearly wanting to resolve some of these issues and solve some of these issues. Um, and Clowney, who was in the final year of his deal and basically the only guy they could really cut to open up cap space. It just kind of worked from a financial standpoint. But yeah, I mean, look, I think he can still play.
Yeah.
I think it's just a matter of like them being two ships passing in the night. Kind of, there's a, does it make sense to keep Clowney this year and then address other needs with future cap space when they plan on contending, or does it make sense to just bite the bullet and kind of improve in other areas?
Yeah, now in the fourth round, kind of making our way down the draft class, the Panthers selected safety Lathan Ransom. What do you see his role looking like going forward? And does it concern you that Carolina ignored the safety position throughout the first three rounds? Because I know that was one of their biggest needs, even though they did acquire Trayvon Moehrig in free agency.
Yeah, I mean, Merrick's going to be kind of the guy that oversees the group. He's going to be used every which way. He'll play nickel, he'll play strong, he'll play free. They're going to use him in zone and man, and I mean, he's like a Swiss Army knife in that backfield for them. But I think Ransom kind of can play like the understudy to that. So when they want Merrick to play single high, well then Ransom can play in the box, and when they want Merrick to play in the box, they can use Ransom at nickel, nickel corner. He can play the big nickel. I still think that they will bring in a post style safety, someone like a Julian Blackman or a Justin Simmons or Marcus Williams, to kind of complement the group. And I think that's where part of this Clowney money is likely to go. Um, I did find it kind of concerning that they waited that long, but I also can't
Mhm.
argue with the value of two premium positions being
Yeah.
completely solidified with a wide receiver and two edge rushers. I thought their day two was brilliant. The way that they double dipped there and the trades that they made were really forward thinking. Look, Ransom is a guy who, played with a broken thumb in a game against Maryland and still blocked a punt that basically helped the Buckeyes win that game. Like he
Mhm.
is tough as nails. He fits their personality stuff. He's a Dan Morgan type player. They need more of that. They need guys that are tough and can overcome stuff. He also strikes me as a guy who's going to be an early leader in the locker room.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think he kind of just fits. They need more, but they needed more before the draft anyway.
Yeah, now I don't necessarily want to go super into the last three picks, but it was Cam Jackson, nose tackle from Florida, Mitchell Evans, tight end from Notre Dame, and then Jimmy Horn Jr., wide receiver from Colorado. Out of those guys, are there any that you're really high on, have high expectations for?
Yeah, I think Mitchell Evans is really interesting. He's kind of a traditional tight end to back like in the Witten days. Like he's a
Mhm.
guy that when you play a lot of 12 personnel with one running back and two tight ends, he's a guy that I feel like can back up either that F or that Y position. So they'll probably start with Jatavian Sanders at the Y and Jatavian Sanders at the Y. Sorry, it's been a long day. And Tommy Tremble at the F. And they're going to have to figure out how to get Mitchell Evans into the fold. Mitchell Evans, a former high school quarterback, tough as nails, came back from an ACL injury and still put up 443 yards and three touchdowns in his senior year. Played throughout the entire season, even through that run through the playoffs. Again, another guy that seemingly fits their toughness model that they're trying to develop. I know that they love Jimmy Horn Jr. He is a
Mhm.
guy that they could use on returns. He's a guy who brings that much needed speed that you brought up earlier. If they can find a role for him, I could see him backing up yet in a lot of ways. And I don't want to dwell too much into it, like you said, but like even Cam Jackson's a really interesting fit because they've been so terrible against the run. Last year, they allowed the most rushing yards in a season since 1980. So they need all the help they can get. And he is every bit of his 6'6", 330-pound frame.
Yeah, and then Jimmy Horn Jr., just funny that he's obviously the second Jay Horn Jr. on this Carolina team, which was kind of the first thing that I thought of when I saw that draft pick. And on a less positive note, I guess earlier today, it was announced that Jonathan Brooks will be out for the entire 2025 season. He played just 3 games last year before suffering his injury. Now that Carolina has Chuba Hubbard, and then they brought in Rico Dowdle, and they have Trevor Etienne as well, who they recently picked up. What do you think Jonathan Brooks' career kind of looks like? I do like to take it season by season, but I feel like at this point you kind of have to look at it in terms of his entire career and what will Carolina potentially look to do with him after this year with all the injuries he's dealt with.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough, right? Like, you saw some of the explosiveness in his 3 games that he played. I remember in Philly when he did tear the ACL, you knew it almost immediately. I mean, it was evident. Like, you could see it from the press box. It's interesting because not only, like, there are guys that have come back from 2 ACL injuries, but we haven't seen a lot of guys tear their ACL, like, consecutive seasons around the same time, and really they didn't play at all. And so I think, like, that's kind of concerning. I think the second he turned towards ACL the second time, after the way they kind of didn't rush him back last year, he was almost definitely going to miss this year. So none of that is too surprising. Dowdle's here on a 1-year deal.
Yeah.
Etienne's more of a change of pace third down back. But, it's kind of hard to project. I mean, he's a really sharp kid. He's got a great attitude. But you can't make the club in the tub, and you can't, running backs need knees. Like, that's like the reality of the situation. You hope that he can string out a career kind of like Correll Buckhalter, who was an Eagles running back in the 2000s, who went through like several knee injuries and was still able to produce. I mean, Willis McGahee obviously had one of the worst knee injuries ever. That one's one to look up. But and he was able to pull out a 10-year career. So I think it'd be wrong to write him off. But I think if you're the Panthers and you're looking at this year to year and natural progression, you needed to draft a guy who could be a number 3 running back this year, but develop into a number 2 in case Brooks couldn't make it back in time. And so I think, we know what his 2025 is going to look like, but we don't know what his 2026 is going to look like. So you kind of have to take him as like, if he's ready to go, that's a bonus. And if he's not, then like you need to prepare otherwise. And it seems like they kind of did that with Etienne. I mean, drafting him in the 4th round when they had that safety need, and they had an inside linebacker need, and they had a cornerback need. I mean, that says a lot about how they view the running back position, and they want to run. And when you've paid Chuba Hubbard what you've paid Chuba Hubbard, you don't want him to take every single touch out of that backfield. So it'll be interesting to see how they use Dowdle. It'll be even more interesting to see how they use Etienne.
Yeah, now the Panthers could potentially still look to, add a little help at positions such as inside linebacker and cornerback. Do you see them targeting any of those positions or any other positions before the start of the season? Maybe if there's a specific player you have in mind. And then a player I kind of want to talk about is Julian Blackman, who I know went on a visit with Carolina. He's a cornerback that's still available that I know a lot of teams are looking at. Could he potentially get signed by them and make an impact this year?
Yeah, let's start with Blackman because he's really the guy. So I reported back in March. I was at South Carolina's Pro Day, and I got word that he was there with Marcus Williams. He was UNC's Pro Day, excuse me. He and Marcus Williams both visited. They had good visits, but it was a matter of money. Now after the draft, everybody kind of reshuffles their deck and realizes this is a second wave of free agency in a lot of respects. I think Blackman's the perfect fit for or perfect complement to Ransom and Merrick. And I think, he's more of a post safety, but he was used kind of everywhere. He was used as a nickel. He was used in the box. He sometimes was out in single coverage at times. He was a corner, in his college career. So, there's a lot there, like you said. And so I think he makes a ton of sense. Justin Simmons is a guy I kind of have an eye on, but I think he's more likely to go to a team that's a contender just because he's a little bit older. As far as corner, I just don't see a lot of guys, available that make a ton of sense. Typically, when you're a team like this and you're on the rise, you want to sign somebody who's between the ages of 26 and 29, and there aren't a lot of guys that are good enough that you kind of want to jump at. Inside linebacker is interesting because inside linebacker is one of those positions where if they don't work out for another team and they're young, they could be kind of reclamated in somewhere else. So I'm interested to see kind of what these post-draft cuts look like, especially as teams get into their rookie mini camps and what have you. I can't pronounce the kid's name, but they're bringing in a guy from Fresno State, a linebacker who has got a pretty interesting profile. Maybe he makes the mark, but really cornerback, safety, and inside linebacker, three positions that I would kind of earmark as positions to look out for.
And following the draft, which we've talked a lot about, the Panthers signed various undrafted free agents: cornerback Mike Reed, safety Jack Henderson, quarterback Ethan Garbers, just to name a few. What undrafted free agent, or are there any undrafted free agents that you see making the biggest impact or having the largest role in 2025? And that's assuming that they even make the team.
Yeah, Ryan Fitzgerald, the kicker from FSU, made
Yeah.
all 13 of his attempts this past year at FSU, including six, I believe it was 6 beyond 50. They have struggled with distance for a while. Eddie Pinheiro was rarely tested, and now Eddie Pinheiro is currently looking for a gig elsewhere. They brought in Fitzgerald to compete with journeyman nomad specialist, whatever you want to call him, Matthew Wright, who's been here a couple of times for spot duty. I expect Fitzgerald to kind of steamroll him in this competition. Fitzgerald should be considered the favorite. He's the one guy that I think if there was a pathway to making this roster, he's the guy. But you brought up Jack Henderson. He's really interesting to me. And we brought up inside linebacker earlier. He kind of is built like an inside linebacker, especially one if you wanted to have like a Jack style inside linebacker, a guy who's got speed, who could play dime linebacker early. He really intrigues me. I think he's got a shot. Isaac Gifford's a guy who I think could be really good on special teams, the Nebraska safety. His brother's Luke Gifford, who played for the Cowboys, the Cowboys and the Titans. Now he's with the 49ers. I think, it'll be interesting to see how Ethan Garbers plays because he'll be at rookie minicamp and he'll be the only quarterback there. So if he looks good and Ted McMillan and Jimmy Horn and all these guys that they just drafted make him look good, maybe there's a bit of a competition for that third quarterback spot, and maybe he can force himself onto the roster. Last year, they only really kept 2 on the main roster. Good teams typically keep 3 on the 53 because they value the quarterback position. If you're contending, you want to make sure you have those 3 guys and that third guy doesn't get poached on the practice squad. So I'm intrigued by that. They brought in 3 offensive linemen who are kind of interesting. I'm interested to see who that 9th offensive lineman will be because 5 of their guys are on walk years on that line. So between the depth and the starting positions. So it'll be interesting to see what they do.
Now, I do have one final question to ask before we wrap things up. If there was one piece of advice you could give to an aspiring sports broadcaster and or journalist like me, what would it be?
Work. Talent is one thing. Work ethic is another. If you love this business, it won't feel like work, but you need to put in the hours. You need to put in the time. You need to dedicate yourself. You need to be disciplined. No story is too small. And I think working on your craft as a writer will help you as a broadcaster. That's something I learned later in my years because I always thought it would be the other way around. If you can talk, you can write. If you can write, you can talk. And so I think, from the standpoint of we can like X's and O's. I had a non-traditional path to this job. Okay, I just loved football and loved writing and
Mhm.
talking about it, and I love talking X's and O's. But if you can humanize the people that you cover, and you can ask intelligent questions just like you have today, and other interviews that I've seen, you're going to go a long way. Because if you're prepared and you're thoughtful and you give people respect and treat people with respect, they will hopefully do the same, and that can open up a lot of doors.
Yeah, I really appreciate that advice. I can't thank you enough for coming on. Is there
Absolutely.
anything else you want to say to the people watching before we wrap things up? Where can they find some of your work?
Sure. CharlotteObserver.com. We're running a great special, $199, I believe, for your first 3 months.
Hmm.
You can follow all of training camp. Nobody covers training camp like us locally. You will get like every ounce of coverage, especially if you are a Panthers fan. If McMillan catches a go route, you will get it in good detail. If you are really big into camp competitions on the NFL level, I got you covered. You will feel like you are there. And you know, other than that, Matthew, I really, really appreciate you having me on. This is really fun.
And you mentioned 199 for the first 3 months, 199 actually for the first 6 months. So
Oh,
even
hey, look at that, Matthew. Way to help us out here. Also,
yeah.
Processing Blue podcast. I do it with Alex Zetlow, who's an amazing partner. Really knows his football. Great writer too, and great teammate. And that's the thing too. If you can be a great teammate, you can cover great teammates. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to join me. Again, big thanks to Mike Kaye for being the 69th ever Highlight Haven interview guest. And as always, we will see you next time.